What's going on YouTube? Welcome to part 2 in the two-part series that we have on the wrappers for WebDriver. In this video we're going to talk about the wrappers for the page elements, right? So anything you can see on the page, be that buttons, checkboxes, drop downs, switches or whatnot, anything on the page that you can manipulate, that you can get access to, that you can get state off. This is the wrapper that's going to be responsible for doing that. So I decided to call my wrapper UI object, and you can see, well, if you watched my previous video, you can see that a lot of this functions actually reference the browser get driver, which what we built in the previous video in our browser manager. So this wrapper automatically out of the box is supporting multi-threading, because that was the purpose why we built it this way. This is to support multi-threading. So if you're creating a framework and you implemented your wrapper in a similar manner, then your framework out of the box without doing anything is supporting multi-threading already. Okay, and it's supporting it very, very well, because there is no management of the driver anywhere. Okay, it's done for you automatically. So we're gonna take a look at some of these calls. Like, we'll actually use these functions on a live website, and I'll use HackerRank to demo the functionality of this wrapper in this video. So, but before that, let's take a look at kind of the structure of this class itself. So the name is UI object. You can name it whatever you want, and the way you initialize this is very similar to the way you initialize, to the way you find elements with WebDriver, right? You use find element, and you pass in the by selector that you want to use, and then you pass in the value for that selector. And this is our main function here as well. The main difference is that this function actually supports multi-threading behind the scenes, and also it supports the wait automatically, right? So not only it just finds the element for us, it also smart enough to wait for that element to appear if you want to wait for that element, right? We can control how much we want to wait for it, and then we get the web element object to work with. Now this function is referenced across the board in this class and all other functions that we have, like get text, get attribute, to see if the element is selected, see if the element is checked, clicking on an element, or inputting a text, right? We reference this function all over the place. So then we also have functions to get a list of web elements that match our by selector and the locator that we pass in, because sometimes maybe we have a more of a generic selector that we're looking for, maybe like input, and that can return multiple inputs on the page. So this would support that if you need to get the list of those inputs. Then we also can get the locator that we passed in to initiate this UI object. And then again, we do have functions for getting the text. Now, because this is a wrapper, we can support, this gives us control, right? So we can decide what we want to support with this function. Maybe we not just be, maybe not only we want to return the text, but we also want to encode it, right? So sometimes, you know, encoding is used in testing. So this function automatically, you know, we can encode the text that we get before we get it, right? So if encoding is passed in, then we're going to encode to whatever encoding you passed in. So essentially whatever encoding this function supports, our function supports that as well. If encoding is not passed in, then we'll just return the text. So this is just an example of the control that you get when you're creating your wrappers. Same thing with an attribute. If we want, we can encode it. Sometimes makes sense, sometimes it doesn't make sense. But you know, it's up to you whether you want to support it or not. If you do, you can. This particular function doesn't support encoding. It just returns you whatever attribute you want. Then we can check whether the element is selected or not. And keep in mind that we're calling this function getElement, and that function already waits for the element to be present on the page. So effectively, we removed a lot of redundant code here to wait for that element to be there, right? So not only it's a very straight up call, UI object, right, is selected to check whether an object is selected. It's also we don't need to wait for that object and then see if it's selected, because it's already done behind the scenes. So it's very straightforward, very streamlined code here. We can also execute JavaScript, as you know, right, with WebDriver. So we can do it the same way. We can get the driver, execute whatever script we need, and we can execute it on the element that we have created this UI object for. So this will essentially, this particular function can be used to check if a checkbox is checked, because a lot of the checkboxes that we see on web pages come or they don't, whenever you click on them, whenever you check them or uncheck them, they don't really update the tags, the HTML tags, to say whether it's checked or not. So you have to use the JavaScript to actually get that value, because JavaScript always will be updated. So this is what we can use here. Now you can see already there's different approaches. There is even though we're using WebDriver, but the way we get certain elements of or certain states of the elements are different, right? Different calls. Here we do it through JavaScript. Here we do it through direct call using the WebDriver API. But because we have our own wrapper, whenever we use our wrapper, it's going to be pretty standardized, right? All the calls are going to be done against the UI object that we created. So it's going to be very neat whenever we use it on our page objects. So similar way, we have some other function, you know, to check if the element is actually present on the page at all, to see if the element is present and clickable. Yeah, so if it's this function employs the exist function to see if the element exists. If it exists, it's going to check if it's clickable. If it's clickable, it's going to return true. If not, it's going to return false. We can wait for element to become clickable, and again, this is just whatever custom logic you want to do. While you're waiting for the element to become clickable, you can put here wait to appear, wait to disappear. Now this function to click an element, this is probably the most complicated function, and I actually streamlined it a little bit for this video here. So just to kind of give you the amount of control that you can kind of put into your wrapper here. So first, before we click, right, whenever we call UI element click on something, right, we check for it to be clickable. Right now, not all elements are clickable. It just depends on how your developers build the page, because sometimes you try to click on a button, it's actually not clickable, or this will return that it's not clickable, but the button is actually clickable and it's visible. It's there, just for some reason doesn't have the clickable state. Most cases it works, most cases it doesn't. In some cases it doesn't. So if you have cases where it doesn't work, you can actually put a flag into your function signature here to check whether it's clickable, or just check if it exists, and you can add logic here. This function will always check whether the element is clickable before it proceeds. And then let's skip this for now. Then we see if you want to use action chains, because sometimes also you not able to the general call, whenever you find element and do click on it, sometimes it may not go through. So in that case, you can switch this use action chains over here to true, and that will kind of simulate a more human-like interaction on the page element, which usually does go through. I think most of the time it's a little bit slower though to perform this action chains. So the default is to do a general call, like on find element, and then do the click on it. But if it doesn't work, we do have an option to use action chains out of the box here. We don't need to create any custom code in our tests to get this functionality. It's inside a wrapper, and the wrapper supports it. Now, if something goes wrong with this click, we can also process whatever exception that we get. So over here, I decide to check if the message that I get from the traceback tells me that the element may be abstracted by something else on the page. So if that's the case, I will try to scroll that element to the center in hopes that maybe if I scroll it a little bit, it's not gonna be obstructed anymore, and then I'm trying to do a click on it here again. Now if that's not the type of stack trace that I got, I'm actually just gonna raise an error, because at that point there's probably something wrong. So I'm just gonna raise an error. Now if I wanted to, I could also wrap this call over here into the same try except. So if I would get something similar of a stack trace here with the action chains, I could also retry it. This would kind of make this function a bit more robust. And then also now we can take a look at this handles. So anytime we do a click on a button or something, right, it can open a new window or it can open a new tab. So in that case, this function also takes care of switching the focus to that. So initially, when we called the click, we didn't do the click yet, right? The click happens over here. This is like the portion of the code where we actually click, which can open the tabs. But initially, we take a record of how many tabs we have, and then once we do our click, we take another look at how many tabs we have. So if we had one tab here and then we clicked, we have two tabs, right? Then we would automatically switch the focus to the latest tab that was opened. So this function takes care of that as well. So whenever or whoever is using my wrapper for UI objects to create their page objects or directly in the tests, even though I don't recommend it to use it directly in the tests, this will take care of switching between the windows. So this just takes some headache off the tester who is creating the tests to like not have to manage that explicitly, right? Which is always nice. It's just nice quality of life things that you get with this wrapper. So then we have some other functions to set the text scroll into center. Yeah, we have like set text, which is gonna clear the field first, then it's gonna input it. Then over here you also have the lose focus support, which is just gonna tab, because sometimes when you type in text, if that field is linked to some JavaScript function, until you like click away or lose focus from that particular field, it's not gonna kick that JavaScript function. So we support that as well. If you want to lose focus, you just set that to true and it's gonna tab for you automatically, so you don't have to write this explicitly in your tests, right? So it also reduces the amount of code you need to write, and it just provides a generic support throughout your framework. Another execute JavaScript call, call here. All of them use the get element to execute this JavaScript on the correct element. Type text will just add text to the existing text if there is any. Doesn't do anything special really, other than threading support from here. Pressing key. Also, we can be supporting action chains for pressing keys here or mouse over. So let's take a look at how we can use this wrapper to actually do something, right? So let's write some code here to do something on a web page on HackerRank, for example. So let's go to HackerRank, and on HackerRank we have this header that has some buttons here, right? We have practice, compete, leaderboard, and jobs. I'm not going to do jobs because there is no header here, but what I'm going to do, I'm going to write code to essentially land on this page. Each thread is going to land on this page, and then respectively of the thread, it's going to click on either practice, compete, or leaderboard, and then it's going to print out like which button on the header is active. Because if you look at this, see this green line over here under practice, it's actually put in by this class active. So that's what makes it active, right? That's what makes this green line appear. If you look at it now, there is no active, so it's not actually highlighted. So I'm gonna make my script output the attribute of the button that it clicked, and then I'm also gonna make it return the h1 tag, which is gonna be this contests or leaderboard or practice respective of the page where it is, and then also print the URL that it's on and print which thread is doing it, because we're gonna have 3 browsers running in 3 different threads that should do that in their browser context, meaning one browser should not be using another browser to do that. So let's go ahead and so this is going to be a list of the buttons that we want to click, and let me see, the first one was practice, compete, and leaderboard. Let's see, practice, compete, leaderboard. Okay. So then we're gonna need to create a function that actually gonna navigate to the respective page and do whatever we want it to do, and then that function should take an argument for the button that it needs to click. So I'll call this function navigate because that's what it's gonna do, and then it's gonna take an argument button, and first thing we need to do, since this is going to be running in multi-threading, we need to create a thread, or we need to create a browser, right? And we need to create a browser in the context of this function, because this function is going to be executed whenever we start a thread. So it's very important to actually run the create driver in a thread, okay? Because it's going to be looking at the context of where it was called from. So over here we'll just reference our browser and we say create new driver, and whoa, what is this? Browser Chrome, and that's the driver that we want to create. So we don't need to assign this to anything, we don't need to keep track of anything, we just call it and everything is going to be done for us there. So now we want to actually create the button object that we want to click. Oh, actually, even before we do that, we need to open the page. So we're gonna call get driver, and then we'll say get, and then I think I'll start them off on the same page, which is gonna be this dashboard page. So I'll just paste that in here. This is gonna be the first URL that all the threads are gonna open. And then the button object, we're going to use our UI object to create the button that we want to click, and we're going to do this by XPath, and this is what I was talking about. You use the standard WebDriver selector, for the by class, and then here we're going to pass in the XPath that we want to use to create the button, right? So if you take a look over here, I already have prepared an XPath that I'm going to use for my buttons. So I'm just going to copy it and paste it into here. Now there's a variable that's going to be changed here, and that's this text of the button, right? Because we may pass in compete or leaderboard as well, right? So this is going to be a variable that we're going to format in, and I'm just going to say button. That's what I want to format in, because that's what I'm going to be passing into this function. So then I also want to create a UI object for the header or the title, right? So I'll say title equals UI object, and I'm also going to try to find that by XPath. And let's take a look at what the XPath is going to be. So this is the title that I'm looking for, and looks like we can just use H1 for this. Yeah, because this is the only H1 on the page, so we can just use H1 just to make sure the other pages work as well with this XPath, and it looks like they do. So let's go back to our code, put H1. Notice that we're not doing anything with this UI objects. We're just kind of instantiating them. We're not actually getting anything from them just yet. But at this point, I'm actually going to say button object click. So I'm going to click on this button, and now I'm just going to print out. I'll go to my browser manager code over here, and I'm going to copy this print statement. So we'll print something similar to what we printed in the previous video. We'll use threading to get the thread that is being used. We'll get the URL, and then we'll print actually, let's go here. We'll print out the title of the page, and we'll print out the attribute, the class attribute for the button as well. So we'll just say button class, maybe. It should be good enough. So button class, and we'll print the way we access this now. We can say title get text, right? So, and then we can do button object and get attribute, and the attribute that we want is class. Let me just kind of stack this over here. A little bit better readability. So yeah, so that's what we're gonna print every time. Like once we finish instantiating the UI objects, we click on the button, we should land on the correct page. Since this is I'm actually going to put time sleep in here to make sure that the page loads properly before we start looking for all the elements on the page. Usually, because if you don't put this in, it's gonna sometimes it's not gonna wait. So we'll just do wait there, and now we need to run this in a threaded mode, right? Oh, actually, before we even run it in threaded mode, we need to make sure we shut down all the browsers. We don't want to leave them open, so we're gonna call shutdown on them. And then I'm just gonna copy this code here to run this in a multi-threaded mode. So I'll just change this code a little bit to work with our buttons. Okay, so threads, I'll actually need to create a list of threads that we'll use to join later on, so we can wait for all the threads to complete. And the function I'm going to use here is navigate, and the argument that I'm going to be passing in is the button. Okay. So let's see what happens when we run this. Technically, it should open 3 browsers, and again, the browser windows, you're going to see them pop up here, but you're not going to actually see them on the screen because of the dual screen mode I'm running in, so they decide to open it in a different on a different screen. So it should open 3 browser windows. It should all of those browsers should go to this page by default, and then respectively they should all click on whatever button we passed in to this function, and then respectively they should return which page the browser is on, right? And notice the key thing here to take away is that we are not saying which thread should go to which page. It's done automatically. We just said that we want to do maybe this is a test, maybe this is a navigation test. We can actually put asserts in here if you want to. We just say that we want to run this navigation test for those buttons, and it's going to be done for us in multi-threaded way, and we don't need to manage the context of the driver, right? We don't need to pass that in anywhere. So let's run this. So the windows are popping up right here. And then, so what happened is, so thread 0 was the first thread that was created. It was created with for dashboard, right? So actually practice, but practice goes to the dashboard page, right? If you click practice, it gets the URL as dashboard. So that's what we see here. Thread 0, the URL of the page is dashboard, title is dashboard, and the button class is nav dashboard active. So then another browser that was in thread 1, this is the second browser that got created for, it was supposed to click the compete button. So when it clicked the compete button, it landed on this page for contests, right? So if we look, if we click compete, it lands on this contests page, and then prints the title, contests, and then the button link is also active, right? So same thing with the third thread, also landed on leaderboards. That's what we were clicking, leaderboards. So the title, the URL is leaderboards, and title is leaderboards, and the button is also active, right? So every single instance, or every single thread had its own browser instance to work with, and it was all done in parallel. Very easy multi-threading support with this wrapper, and also very much readable wrapper for UI objects. So that's how you kind of create your wrappers. That's how you can use them. That's how you can kind of control all different functionality through the wrapper. In some of the next videos that I'm going to do, I'm actually going to create some page objects. So you'll see me using this UI object wrapper a lot for the page objects. That's actually why I created this video first, is so we can kind of reference this video and that you guys know how to create wrappers for your own frameworks to then go ahead and create page objects. And yeah, so stay tuned for the page object video. And as always, guys, if this video helped you out, make sure to like, subscribe, and share, and take care.